Hello, Thomas Chokin, and hello, world. Hello, everyone. Hi. I'm here again, joined by my friend and colleague Thomas Chokin, who has prepared a wonderful course on health and virtue. And it's very important. I've been thinking about this so much since Thomas brought this to me. Why bring health and virtue together? Do they have anything in common at all? No. Health is just something you optimize for so you can live forever. And who needs to be virtuous? We have AI for that to make all these difficult moral choices and decisions for us. All we need to do is live long, like a vegetable, in a vegetative state, basically. So you're bringing this together, and this has let me see a few things. But before we get into all of that, maybe you can tell us how you basically came up with the entire idea for the course, and then what you were looking for in the readings. So the course is based on Plato and Aristotle, and we are also going to uh, be reading many excerpts from these two thinkers at the course, which, by the way, I should say, begins, if you're joining the seminars, begins next week, Saturday, the 6th of September. The link to enroll is in the description of this live stream if you're watching this on YouTube, which I hope you are. So, Thomas, tell us what made you come up, because you could have gone so many different ways with when it comes to health in the ancient world. You could have gone to Asclepius, perhaps, or the Hippocratic Oath, Hippocrates, etc. So, why Plato and Aristotle, and why this connection of health and virtue?
Well, obviously, first of all, Johannes, it's great to see you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I'm very excited to come back with the Halcyon Guild to teach his next seminar course on health. I think as a first volley or point is health is a really important gateway to metaphysics. And
Yeah.
and especially in a post-metaphysic world where it seems like this, where we see this idea of designer drugs and designer babies and a kind of optimization of the matter of our bodies. It seems like the entire discussion of health is a kind of quantitative analysis that is of materialism. But when we actually look at the ancients, in terms of Aristotle, Plato, and people like Hippocratic, for example, I cite him in the text. We find out that health is a really important gateway keystone, a lens to understand what these ancients are talking about in any of their other aspects. They make a very deep connection between health and virtue. Very famously, Plato's line from the Republic is to say virtue is a kind of health of the soul, a good working condition. So this was a very clear understanding. They kind of give us a kind of clearer gateway just to start, is that much like virtue, health cannot be delegated. Your health is yours. There is only health of this body in this place, in you in a particular. So, but yet we have an understanding of health that can be of a universal at the same time. This move of the individual, the unique, the one, with the universal at the same time, as we see a quality and the beautiful has that same quality. Health is one of those aspects of it too. And thus, just like virtue cannot be delegated and deferred, there is only for one subject, for this human being to have virtue. Just like that, health has the same quality. So that's why, for me personally, I think the connection between the two is very intimate, both because both of them are in a place. There's a kind of, we see in health that there is this kind there in the occasion of the place of this body in this moment in this interaction, that we find out how health can be understood in the ancients and how that gives us a connection, a kind of gateway to larger concepts of analogy in general. So that's partly why, as a first volley, why I think this is a worthwhile discussion, especially in comparison to the normal discourse today of a kind of, we can just algorithmically defer this, kind of defer this outside the subject of the intelligible activity of a human subject with rationality, that this can be can externalize to AI, to computers. There's a kind of consequence by doing that, versus what if we go back to the ancients and think about how they thought about health. That might be an alternative way to think about it.
And in some warped sense, though, isn't AI a replacement universal in a sense? Because it's pretend, you know, not pretends perhaps because there's, but appears to be, seems to be objectified knowledge, or pure objectivity. To see what I'm trying to say?
And of course,
Uh,
well, the models are is based on what information was put into it. So it's actually based on the symbolic right relationship presented into it. It's kind of a statistical averaging. That
yeah,
is not
yeah,
necessarily. Go on.
but sorry, but that's also interesting. Is averaging. So go on, yeah.
Well, I talked in the health course. I mean, the beauty course, we talked about this is the difference of a kind of average as was intelligible versus an exemplar, right? An excellence that kind of draws the measure of intelligibility in the first place. That difference is a very subtle one, but it's very important because of things like, oh, I can just let AI tell me what to think, but also usually, and I'll quote Daniel Gardner. He's talked about this a lot in a lot of recent OG Rose conversations. There's a response to constraints. So, and actually Aristotle talks about this, the relationship of the hypothetic necessity and material necessity. There's a kind of relationship between how might something be the case and the conditions and constraints of matter. Those parts are interact with each other. And those actually those limitations and those constraints actually inform what's the appropriate fitting response. That is not necessarily the statistical average. There's other lines about this. The activity of a doctor or a physician, especially with athleticism. Aristotle quotes about this. If the average is 6, that does not mean every single athlete gets 6 ounces of meat, for example, or food. Some people need more and some people need less. How would an AI answer those kind of questions? It can't. It can only give you the average.
I just wonder what a world will be like in 10 years when everything because that's been produced, let's say 25 years now, that's what we've put up on the internet. That's what AI is, so-called AI is averaging out. And at some, now Musk has said that training on or scaling on available data doesn't lead to any success. So what we now have to do is we need to scale on synthetic data. But I can't really articulate it fully yet, but there seems to be this loss of the metaphysical, makes us very vulnerable, of wanting to have some sort of access to at least omniscience or apparent omniscience. That well, you can see in projects like transhumanism, some sort of misguided pseudo Christianity or even Gnosticism. So it's not all that avant-garde. In the case of Brian Johnson, who grew up a Mormon, an interesting religion, let's say, who is, I would personally say, who is personally not virtuous because he's in competition, for example, with his offspring. He uses the blood of his son, for example, to stay young. He compares his nightly erection to his son's nightly erection, which I wonder though. So maybe we don't have to go into detail on this, but I wonder the degree to which we have separated health and all that comes with it, from virtue, um, and also how we understand well-being in general. So maybe health is. I mean, how would you, if you had to paint in broad brushes, broad strokes, what would you say, how we in general understand health in the so-called Western world as compared to the ancients?
Well, I think a big note, actually, besides these great Brian Johnson examples, which just scream of like literally succubus vampire energy, like living on the blood of their one's child. It's fascinating, but I think just to add an image to this is actually that point is bodybuilding. So something that can be athletic activity, a weight training, conditioning. There's a very big difference in bodybuilding versus conditioning the physical conditioning for the sake of something versus the image of for its own sake. You brought up in the last live streams idea of like this mimetic desire, mimetic imitational desire, and that is usually drawn out by the obsession of the images. So the making of a body for the sake of appearance of an image and the kind of of a kind of mimetic desire of a social media space versus conditioning the body for the sake of athletic sports, or even on a practical level of, say, help if you're having, like, actually on the note of raising children, for example, just being physically strong enough so you can play with your children, and not
Yeah.
be out of wind.
Yeah.
I have nephews that are young that they want to play nonstop, and if you're not in enough physical condition, you actually are hindered from doing that. So that's a very subtle detail. But again, and actually we talk about this in the course, is that we find it from Aristotle, this operation, this quality of the body aids and contributes to intellectual activity. They're not this, it's not this huge, it's not this divide. Certainly the mind and rational activity has superiority over the vegetative state. As Aristotle famously says, the vegetative state does not have virtue in of itself. There's a very famous line about that. But there is a fact of contributing, especially in the moral virtues of temperance and courage, which relate to pleasure and pain and regulation of the body, oriented towards that, dispositionally oriented towards it. Those are qualities, I think, that are generally missing in terms of we think of the obsession of the image, of the appearance, of the simulation. I mean, you brought this before, the simulacrum, and
Yeah.
a kind of connection to a deeper, something beyond the boundedness of our simulational models, which are all this discussion of the AI training data. These are all basically bounded models that are trying to optimize for what's understood and known. This kind of break of something potentially more than what we understand currently, it's kind of a dismissed. It's nothing. It's just kind of like dismissed from the outside. And I think a big note is that's why even on the discussion of people usually get resistance to telos, but necessity when we talk through with health is that it has to be for the sake of something.
Yeah.
And something that's not beyond just appearance or desire appearance necessarily, which is also a very corollary of why the confusion of beauty and health is actually usually a very important detail. When we talk about beautiful bodies, this is not
Yeah.
necessarily. I had one individual in the private seminar and one with me where this was a constant issue when we talk about, is beauty just attractively hot women or men, for example? That's that fact that was a trip up shows us what's happened here. We misunderstood what is even the proper fittingness of a beautiful body. It is not for the sake of just raw attraction. This kind of mimetic image desire capture approach. So this is what we say, that we can see the distinction drawing out of the ancients to contemporary thought about health by the fact that there's no orientational disposition of the sake of the body for health. What is it besides this mimetic image simulacrum presentation?
Yeah. Yeah. Or, I mean, worse. Or not worse, but we try to produce, let's say, a certain body. So you have the phenomenon of Ozempic, I think it's called, which, so I know next to nothing, and I can't, I know next to nothing of how it works, but I think what it does, it produces extremely thin bodies. So it has a very high success rate to slim people down, and they begin to look like this. So so you see that with celebrities, all of a sudden they're quite thinned out, like
Yeah.
so. And what it does, though, is apparently it reduces the muscle mass in your body, which is why you get those kinds of faces. So in order to produce a certain just figure, but what I always see in this is that it's always just, as you say, it's to copy an image rather than you could even say just trying to um, praise the transcendent, perhaps, or I mean, you mentioned last time we don't have an image of what human nature is. We have no idea what human nature is anymore. That's perhaps the issue. If you come at this maybe from more sort of perhaps Heidegger, you could say that there's no relationality. Um, the wine is not a gift from the gods and a gift from the earth, and we gift it back to the earth and gift it back to the gods by savoring some wine, for example. It's just a liquid. It's one aggregate state next to another. So bodies are produced and reproduced, etc., in an endless chain to no end, and hence it. But would you say that perhaps then is health, is virtue a is is becoming virtuous the telos of becoming healthy, or is it the other? Is it no? How do they connect then?
I know, right? That's kind of one of the questions.
Yeah,
I would probably say that health is one of the most direct access ways to cultivate virtue. So obviously, it's not the totality of it, but it's
yeah,
certainly the beginning point. This is why, and again, it gets memed like crazy. But Jordan Peterson's note of when you first wake up, make your bed. Again, it's memed out of existence, of made fun of. But what he's getting at is that the domain of action in which you have control over, that you can inculcate a new habituation, starts in the body. Aristotle does have notes about this in terms of the relationship of education and the upbringing and your dispositional state as of how you're raised does have big effects on the success of this habit of future development. That's
yeah,
true. So, but in terms of a disordering or the ordering of the kind of a fittingness of response, of harmony, right? That idea. So actually, this note of harmony is a very important element.
yeah,
Health, in terms of as a larger concept, is a starting point, right? In terms of the regulation and the ordering of the body and desire, and in memory to orient. I think because I made a note about that last live stream, and I think
yeah,
that's an important detail.
yeah,
Much of memory, the quality of memory is essential for virtue, and not just of the not of the moral virtues only, but of the intellectual virtues. Aristotle has a very famous line about the relationship of induction requires memory. You have to
yeah.
remember. And if you think of things of, and this is why it relates to dopamine addiction, screen time, attention is dropping dramatically. So thus the domain of memory is being deflated and compressed in. So we can see that the intellectual virtues are certainly being impacted or stymied by a kind of clamping down on qualities of health. So to answer that question, they have an intimate relationship that tends to be, at the minimum, happening at the same time, or at least one is in a sequence with the other in a very close relationship.
So, can you say a bit more on how memory and the parasitical um, attention economy in which we have to live somehow, how that goes together? And obviously, I have a few ideas, but I'd like to hear what you think.
Sure.
And also, I would say this though. I think the uh, um, what it, what we want is again a seemingly perfect memory, where we assume that it must be picture perfect. So you must have a clear image that doesn't ever change over time, and only then is memory perfect. And that, of course, the computer can do so much better, we assume, because as you know, the internet never forgets anything, right? Those websites we were all reading 20 years ago, they all still exist. Clearly, that's not the case. The internet is the biggest Alexandrian library ever constructed. It forgets all the time. It has, and I think at some point we'll be happy if we still have physical books at home, because so much will have disappeared in the end. Um, I, I mean, this goes into a broader discussion we don't need to have now, but something that I'm very interested in is I think what we might assume is imperfect memory is not so much imperfect, but um, the past in some sense keeps changing as much as our memory does as well. It's not as static as perhaps we think, and hence also, if we have a, let's say, a universalistic notion of healthness that can be produced on average and perfectly everywhere, then this perhaps also, do you see what I'm trying to say? Perhaps
It
that,
does, but
yeah,
it's part of a fallacy of a closed system. It
yeah,
thinks that the entities in question are a closed system that exactly can be solidified into a static state, right? And then just
yeah,
recalled at all times, exactly the same. But that's
yeah,
not how this works. This is why news. I mean, the big move, especially in Aristotle, but it's in Plato too a little bit. Nous is such a huge quality aspect. This apprehensional remembrance of anamnesis or of nous, of this kind of
yeah,
insight revelation of remember, because when you the example from Aristotle is a note that when you're observing a pattern in time, and then you realize, wait, this event from this, and then you make connections to the past. This is not an exact copy. It's kind of like relative realization. Kind of like there's certain things get picked out as more important than others. So it's not a direct copy every single time. It's a something of importance got struck through, and you remember that, and then you think
yeah,
about the consequence. You have the ossification consequence of that. That's one aspect of this, and that relates to the idea of um, the health of this is why the reason why health is I'm going to give a tip off. Like, why is this about analogy health? It's
yeah,
because the different, even just the question of beyond even the motion movement between a physical organic body and a physical space, besides that move, even
yeah,
in the body, the health of the eye and the health of your bones are completely different, made of different materials. They do different functions. They have different interactions, and they could be. And we know this because they can fail in many different ways that are totally unalike. Yet we understand that this thing called health relates, applies to both these qualities, like to both these entities, like these subunits, right? So that's why it show, and more importantly, in their responsiveness and harmonization of external factors. And it's always the catch. It's like the fact that it would have this persistence over time in the face of outside stressors.
yeah.
That means this is not a closed system. It can't be.
But it's so much of what in so when you go on YouTube, and after, so anyone who's listening to this now after the as a recording later on, the algorithm, if you're logged in, will then present you with other health content. And that might very well be because we've mentioned transhumanism and Brian Johnson and others, that very well might be someone who is in the don't die longevity um, movement, let's say. When you listen to them, and I do sometimes. Why not? It's just this endless, this is endless information about what this receptor does in the brain, and then this does. And recent, research shows you have to sleep exactly 5 hours and 45 minutes, and then you live a half a year longer. So first of all, a layman doesn't understand a single word, right? It uh, if you then consider that there's a replication crisis in the sciences, that's maybe perhaps another issue to discuss. But also, what it doesn't, the only end to it always is we will live longer for the sake of living longer, which is not, as you can hear, an end in itself. It's not. It's not like human freedom. It is rather, it's something else. It's extension for the sake of extension. It's enhancement for the sake of enhancement.
Number go up.
It's number go up. It's number go up, but numbers are endless. I mean, the Greeks knew this already. There's a reason why you have to ban certain arts from the polis. But so that numbers can go up forever. But ultimately, you have to ask at some point, but why do you want to live longer? and then you have to give a, a sufficient reason. You have to give a reason that grounds your entire activity. And if you don't, it's ultimately just, and it can be, seemingly vitalistic and life affirming, but it's ultimately just nihilism. Maybe even some sort of what Nietzsche might call a weak pessimism, something that doesn't really, accept the horrors of life and of existence, but just hides and clothes itself in a banal optimism, etc. So, yeah,
Well, I mean, it's a kind of absent, and a kind of absent-mindedness in the sense of like it's a kind of fixation on a means with no larger, like, don't think about the bigger point. Don't think about the end. Let's just worry about getting this number go up. Like basically do these features, we do these protocols, right? And you can't get it's a kind of loop trap of means of just develop of operating on the means of things, not the larger purpose. That's what you're hinting at. Because health is an end to itself. That's what's interesting. So health is an end to itself, but not for the sake of living forever. Health is something very different. It's a kind of, one shorthand way we can think about it, it is a possibility space. Like there's certain dispositional possibilities that in health that we give us, that we enter into as being healthy, that if you don't have health, you don't have. So I find that, and that's kind of a similar note about actually a lot of other attributes. Like a very corollary to this would be wealth. Like, so having money to get more money is it's exactly the same problem. It's the same logic, right? What's the concern? Make money. Okay, great. How do we do that? Great. And then we talk through all the mechanics of means, how to get it. And then we get into that loop of like, but you can do more. Great. And then we'll just get more and more and more and more. But this is why, magnificence was a virtue in Aristotle. This money was not for its own sake. It was meant for exchange. It was meant to do things with this, actually to bring beauty. If we read in ethics.
Yeah, to donate, to gift, to
Yes, as an example. So it's not for its own sake. It's not just for the sake of accumulation for the accumulation's sake. It's for the sake of revealing beauty, right? By activities of magnificence, for example. So it's very similar. That would be a thread line with health. It's the same thing. This body that's being cultivated in health, with health, is meant to be towards virtue, which reading the Aristotelian accounts, I was reading it again just as for humoring myself. The kalos is constantly being cited by Aristotle. It's not this, so it's not even just Plato who has this idea of the beautiful as something very important for his line of inquiry. Aristotle has it too. Kalos is running is threaded through the text. It's very fun too, because the kalos is this idea of like the idea of the height of a magnet. It's interesting because magnitude, like magnificence, has magnitude in it. It has to be great and fine beauty. Kalos too. It's both. So I find that as an interesting kind of answer, kind of this. It's not like there's an issue of means, right? Deliberation is all about that, right? The activity, deliberation, talking through the means of things is perfectly fine. It's just that when it's allowed to be like a cancer with no containment of what is this for, what is its purpose for this, that it can cause running amok of the spiraling, running the logic, and then people spend their whole lives just working through this. It's kind of like it's almost like a hedonic treadmill, where what are we doing? We're just getting pleasure. Okay, great. How are we getting that pleasure? By getting number go up, in whatever direction, whether it be money making directions or it might be number go up. So I hit my numbers. I hit my numbers for how many steps I did in the day. Because that's the thing too, is like all the publications and literature, regardless of, as you said, the note of the replication problem, which I very much feel that a lot of science it's mythos, just masquerading as logos. I'm going to be honest with you. It has the appearance, and I've said in private conversations that, mythos is really as logos with defanged of necessity, where it doesn't have that force of necessity that this is the truth, and you got to take it with force. But it's the same operation. Like a lot of and because listen, the accounts of why we build muscle, for example, have changed. You go back in the 80s or 70s or the 50s, you're going to hear different accounts about how muscle building occurs, micro terrors, things like that. versus now hormonal changes and all. See
Right.
the
Yeah, it's all
mechanism.
about hormones now. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, exactly. But then we just
yeah.
forget. See, that's always the part about
But
there's something
isn't
about human nature. We just constantly forget. We are constantly falling in these traps of our logos. We think that it's so absolute. And then we're just like,
yeah,
oh, we just forget that, all right, we were actually wrong. Whoops. And that we
or
read those accounts
yeah,
in the past, they're
or maybe,
mythos.
or maybe things were really different. I mean, one of the weirder thoughts you can have is that, Aristotle wasn't wrong. Anything we might consider that's the nature of the cosmos. It's just the cosmos was really different. That could be true. I don't know.
That might be a
Um,
possibility too.
but what I think sometimes, just as a some social commentary, let's say, this obsession in the beginning, perhaps with late modernity, 20th century, post-war modernity, etc., with how to live, all kinds of, basically every magazine is just filled with, this is the kitchen you have to have, this is the Tupperware you have to have, this is the car you have to have, this is the haircut you have to have, this is how you build muscle. This complete obsession with even just, what to eat and when to eat it. I wonder, what were people doing 200 years ago? We can't, or how to raise a child. I once had a very fun conversation with Tom Hodgkinson, who was a British writer and the editor of the Idler magazine. And he said, well, my parents, they just had us. They just had us. On a Sunday when they wanted to go off to the pub, they took us to the pub in the car and brought us out some chips. That's fries for you Americans. And they were drinking in the pub because kids weren't allowed in. Now you do this today, they call social services on you. And so, they just had us. So I wonder what this over theorizing and over complicating of everything really actually is maybe that reveals some sort of deep disorientation and insecurity, uncertainty, of what the good life is, as easy as that, or as simple as that seems to be, and that we have no orientation, and precisely because it's so endless and orientation less, if that's a word, then it can only ever produce. We have to do this newest thing and this newest thing and this newest thing, um, and yeah, it just to me shows the I mean, in some sense it could almost be very simple. You do have to think about and think through health, and also have to start acting uh in certain ways. But I mean, this is obviously just to say this is not what the course is going to do. It's not going to give you the newest science of hormonal imbalance and how to counter any of that. No. It's uh, it's going to it's inviting you to think through how health and virtue relate, and you can articulate this much better than I, in order, um, well, for you to find, in some sense, that that there's no great science that goes into it. What you need is the appropriate telos in your actions and your thinking. Would you agree? Is this more or less where this is going, or would you
Yes.
rephrase it perhaps?
Yes. And by the way, I mean, this note about the image, there's a difference. There's the idea that, one of the chapters of the seminar, we're going to speak about this, is the idea that
Yeah.
Socrates presented by Plato is a kind of exemplar presented to you of one way to consider what would health be like. Because Socrates, as presented, he is more than simply just a man thinking, right? He was a warrior, right? He had all these accounts or qualities about him and the fulfillment of his life. In the story told through Plato's dialogues, we find out that there's actually a much more sophisticated account of what it means to have an order in your life. It's
Yeah.
also a kind of that'd be just one note to build from what you said before. But a big one is the idea that what used to be in tradition in culture used to give you, where you just had the kids, or it was kind of obvious. It was obviously embedded in your culture, in your
Yeah.
tradition.
Yeah.
What was it like to be alive, live a life and to live a certain way of life? But that is absolutely the case not there. Instead, everyone just presumes they know, but they actually, it's straight up. It really does feel like the moment if we actually ask these scientists, what is health? I think a lot of them would probably say the absence of pain
Yeah.
and the appearance of pleasure. I think that's probably the general heuristic I've got to bet what you would
Yeah.
get.
So
So I think it is.
I had a conversation with someone who did my course on Goethe's Faust, and it that has all the associations of Faustian striving, etc., in endless striving against nature and trying to dominate her. Perhaps that's a bit of a cartoonish reading of Goethe's Faust, but still, this gentleman asked me whether can you really I don't even know why health came up, but can you really read anyone from even just a few hundred years ago and anything to do with health, given how many advances we've made, how much progress we've made, etc. And I asked him, okay, think about this. Think about this following way. What's the principle of medicine? What, what I mean, if anything, if it's to be anything, what's its principle? To heal. All right. So does that change? I mean, if it's changed, then you're no longer dealing with medicine. If it's now to diagnose you so that you can write it off with the insurance company, if it's to make profit for the clinic, which I would not say. I don't think that even in America, I don't think that maybe there are companies or people who are profit driven, but overall, I don't think that that's what drives it. It's just maybe the system has the wrong incentives, etc. But I wonder though the degree to which. So this is something else I wanted to ask you. While you think about it, I'll show people the enrollment page. I wonder. We touched on this last time, but we didn't really maybe say enough. How do you think do quantity and quality? So because for example, you just yourself, do you track anything? And if you track, you don't have to go into details, but if you do, how do you track and to what end? Because sometimes tracking, I mean, just sheer quantification can be useful, right, and even be helpful. And while you're thinking about this, I'll just show everyone the course enrollment page. And if, by the way, if people have any, we'll be here maybe another
15
10
minutes.
minutes, 10 minutes. Yeah. And then Thomas has to rush off. If you have questions or comments, ask them now in the chat and we'll get to them as quickly as possible. So if you head over to the enrollment page and you see all seminar dates, those will be every Saturday in September, beginning next week on the 6th of September. And we're meeting from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time if you're in the US, or 7 to 9 p.m. Central European Time. All right. So if you can make at least, let's say, 2 of the seminars, or 5 in total, then take the philosophical fellowship. We record all seminars so you can listen back to them later on. And Thomas mentioned this before, that you can also take private philosophical dialogues with him in addition to the 5 group seminars. There are 4 sessions here. That's the 3rd tier. And if you really find it difficult to make the time for the seminars, then take the self-study option and just change your life in this way. There are also payment plans if you scroll down a bit further, always 3 payments each. And yeah, enrollment is open. We're closing enrollment soon. And we begin in, 8 days, almost on the dot. Okay, so Thomas, what would you like to say to my question?
Yeah, I think, and that's the thing. It's quantification is very useful. I think especially as you made a note about it. I think it was maybe off the call or I forgot in the call, but an idea of correction of self-deception.
Yeah.
Numbers are very powerful. measure is very powerful to break self-deception. And it doesn't have to, it can be quantitative. It doesn't have to necessarily have to be. So for example, I do use the 10,000 step heuristic. You know, if you're doing about 10,000 steps in a day, that's a pretty good metric for a good step, step count in terms of caloric intake. Tends to be you tend to burn about 400 calories that way on average. That's fine, and that's useful to know. And then, by the way, that's the technology nowadays. It's almost streamlined now. Basically, if you're walking with your cell phone, like I have an iPhone, it has a step counter built in, so that gives a very easy tracking to it. But I think beyond that, and that's the thing. So, but even you don't even necessarily even do that. It's just writing down like things like journaling is a kind of measure. How are you feeling? What is your experience in this day versus another day, and looking for the patterns of when I do certain things, how do I feel? I think that's a huge aspect. So measure is really powerful because it gives you, that's why it's a tool of memory. This is what Plato was saying. No, really, it's true. Because it's that's what exactly was being said in Phaedrus.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Right. The purpose of writing is it's a note of memory for those who have knowledge already, versus just having the thing written down as an image of memory, image of knowledge.
Very good. For those who don't know, Plato, 2,500 years ago, warned against AI in the Phaedrus, or what we now call AI. That language is not a tool for memory, but can at best serve as a reminder, as a tool of reminding us, but we still have to do the thinking. Yes. And yeah.
I think I made a note to you about this privately about Phaedrus, where the 4 modes of mania. There's a note about the first mode of mania.
Go on.
From Phaedrus, where it was basically it was prediction of the future via signs. So normally it's told as like soothsaying, but I don't find that very far to inference that's what AI does. It's just a statistical averaging and a prediction of what's the next likely statement to be made within this model, within that language field model.
Yeah.
But again, side note. But yes, the main thread is what you just said from Phaedrus.
Well, we could go a bit crazy, but we don't.
We don't need to go there. But to summarize, the big note is measure is incredibly important for memory. Like thus that's the thing. It's like it's a very subtle relationship of like, where is the knowledge? Is the knowledge in the measurement?
Yeah.
Or is it in the subject?
I mean, memory is important. If someone who loses their memory doesn't just, you lose your sense of self and identity and who you were, which is devastating. But you also lose, if you just think about, memory doesn't mean that you have a perfect picture of everything in your mind, but there's a certain familiarity of the world that comes with it. You're embedded in your memory in a sense, and the memory of the world. So by having good memory, you contribute to ordering the world in a good manner. And I sometimes see with what technocratic tools are trying to do is they're trying to order the polis, let's say, or order and organize memory by organizing endless data, because data are endless. They're just an abyss. But it's always coming from the outside. It's totalitarian in that sense, that it's trying to close off what cannot be closed off entirely. Go on.
Another note is that, by the way, memory also applies to matter in the sense that our bodies, when one for example, when one trains,
muscle memory.
No, really. I mean, but it didn't. That muscle, your cultivation of your body in a certain arrangement was not instantaneous. It was a cultivation over time. So basically, the body, as shaped in a certain presence you're seeing in front of you, is a demonstration. It's actually a mode of memory. It's storing them. It has the memory of the past in the present moment, because you could not have this body in front of you if you didn't cultivate yourself a certain way.
Yeah. So other than, let's say, images on a screen, of what could give guidance. I mean, the Greeks had their gods, obviously, in the images or the sculptures of their gods. What do we have?
What do we have? It's very ironic because I think we have all this information, we have all this data.
Yeah.
That's what's so interesting about it. And and that's the thing is, and especially with digital technologies, we have even the thing like a step counter. And our relationship here, I think I should make notice things like the internet, like these kind of spaces where again we never met in person. These can be ordered towards virtue. So it's not an antagonistic stance, but there's certainly a possibility. So I'm saying this in the sense of if we take the moment to reconsider the things that maybe we're taking for granted or things we thought could just the tradition had baked in, maybe this is an opportunity for us to rethink this in terms of coming back to the ancients to think through what did health mean, what did virtue mean, and how might we make the digital space we live in today more towards that direction. I think in general, I would say, I think a big note is some of this has to be asked to the question on the individual level, because that's the thing is that what kind of life do you want to live? What kind of activities do you want to have? And what is the fittingness orientation for that kind of life? Especially under the context of a beautiful life. God, I mean, that's a very very strong statement to make, but that is, I think, maybe my stance of how to answer this question. What would be a guide is the kind of question of what would be a fine life? What would be the beautiful life that you would want to live? That's maybe a good heuristic to get started with.
Yeah. So you have to begin from the end, basically. You have to, which also includes your death.
Right? Yes. Yeah, Greater Hippies had a whole line about basically a beautiful death, a beautiful burial. There was one of the scenes discussions about that from Greater Hippies. Yeah.
And from that, you think backwards on how you would like your life to, how it should play out or will have played out.
But that's also another point. I said this off the record with you before this call. A note is that, see, the key thing about health is also it's the space of the contingent. This is not, you cannot capture this in absolute necessity in a static state environment, hermetically sealed environment, where you're going to keep all invariance chance away. It doesn't work that way. Not with health. Health is this response. It's kind of this tending responsiveness to change, to flux, to possibility, to like response, right? Stressors. So that's part of makes you human, is that we have to respond to stressors. We have to respond to the occasions in front of us. So thus the operation of prudence, right? So it's not just understanding of the universals. There's also the application of the particular circumstances, and especially against constraints. So this is where the model from Aristotle of necessity of prudence as the interface between the intellectual virtues and the moral virtues. This is an important aspect about it. I think health is really one of those aspects that points that out, that it's a kind of fittingness to the occasion. And part of that's out of your control. There is a contingency about it. You can't choose if you get in a car accident. You can't choose if you get a biological chance disease. Now, some of this is environmental and it's a larger discussion, but certain chemical, like
chemicals and what's in the
those slightly out of your control. That's certainly fair.
Yeah.
But as a general point, though, that response to chance and the contingent is actually one of the things inside health. Actually, that's an area I think a lot of people who want to optimize everything within an algorithm and really pin it in, that's something they seem to forget or not want to address in their account.
Well, I mean, Brian Johnson does address this in a recent series of tweets, etc. He said that he understands that people suffer from anxiety, but if you do, you should plan for your anxiety attacks sometime.
I saw that. You got to put a calendar. You got to put a calendar date in.
So let me just pull up my iCal here. What's it now? Friday, the 29th of August. I think I've got about 5 minutes tomorrow afternoon at maybe 4 p.m. For a bit of worry, so that I can still optimize my sleep count, because that's what it's all about. Right? I need to optimize my sleep counts, my deep sleep, etc. So I should have it in the afternoon when I'm no longer that productive as I may have been at 5 a.m. in the morning, but it's still early enough so that I can still get some good sleep. But you can't plan for this. It's the attempt to crowd out any contingency, anything, and it is really it's almost like a cartoon version of what a misguided Nietzschean might think Platonism uh, or metaphysics is really about. This is what's so striking about and I think the digital lends itself to this because it's so seemingly perfect and timeless, etc. Um, and so image driven and crowd, but instead, yeah, I think that was a really a good point in the end. How there should be a retrieval, a return to the ancients, precisely in this time for the reasons you've given. So, if you have any closing remarks, let us know now. I'll just say uh, again, I'll invite you all to join us. The link to enroll is in the description of this video if you're watching this later. We begin next week, Saturday, 6th of September, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 6 p.m. UK time and 7 p.m. Central European Time. And there are 3 different tiers or study paths, as I like to call them, to choose from. So there's self-study if you want to just learn at your own pace, and maybe you're in a time zone where it's difficult. Sometimes we have people joining in from Australia, so that's not that easy perhaps to make for you, except if you get up at 4 a.m. anyways. Then, if you have time for the seminars, do come. There will be 4 regular seminars led by Thomas, and a 5th one, which is a symposium where you present your own work. It's a final group discussion as well. Of course, Thomas will be attending as well, and also give you comments on what you presented, etc. And if you'd like to, this is this one here, Philosophical Fellowship. And if you'd like to take additional private sessions with Thomas, so in addition to the 5 seminars, there's 4 private sessions. The seminars are 2 hours each. They will be recorded. And those private dialogues, there are 4 of them, an hour long each. So there's only a couple available. Than this, if you'd like to discuss health and virtue with Thomas even more, maybe also beauty, of course, as well, then this is for you. Thomas, any closing remarks? Thank
No,
you, by the way, for your time today.
likewise. I
Say
mean,
this
Johan,
now.
it's always fun to talk to you. I always appreciate talking with you. The pithy comments are just they're so outstanding. Obviously, I want to thank those who did already bought the course for health or are going to be in the seminar. We have a couple signups for that. So I want to thank those who did sign up. I'm very excited to work with those individuals. And I think this is again, much why philosophy matters is on spaces when we realize what was taken for granted was actually, there was no grounding it for what we took for granted. Yeah. And I think this as we're hinting at the end here, this note of this kind of refusal to see the contingent, to see the necessity, the relationship of the contingent to what it means to be human. I think this is a very key quality of what health was applied to for the ancients, and especially in that relationship with virtue. This is something that in cultivation of the self, because remember, there's this very famous line from Aristotle that a man with greatness of soul and virtue, even in the face of despair and hardship and misfortune, he still shines forth in virtue. This is what health gives us. And this is, I think, a very important quality. And again, it cannot be deferred. It cannot be offset to AI. This is something of your ownership. Your health is of your ownership, and no different virtue is as well. So this is why I'm very excited to teach this course. And we see that both in terms of application and in thought, we see that for health as this gateway of the metaphysics of the ancients, and actually seeing it as legitimate. Then even when we think it's not as this thing to be written off, but it actually has a lot of import and use in the world today. As we go through this lecture series, we'll uncover and realize together. So I look forward to working with all of you next week, and the seminar starts on September 6th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
There's always time zone confusion. There's too much contingency in the time zones. But we're lucky because there's no change to summertime, which is always a mess because Europe moves to wintertime earlier.
Yes.
So that's an issue, but not for you, not this time. So 4 seminars plus the symposium, that's 5 in total. If you sign up now, everything's been uploaded. That means the videos are all uploaded, the lecture notes, which you can download and print off, and also the excerpts that you should read for each lecture and seminar have been all uploaded. So you can just find those. It's very easy to find ancient Greek texts in translation. There's Perseus by Tufts University, for example, which is an extremely good source for all things ancient Greek and Latin and more. So there are standard translations. I think the Loeb translations are published online by them, if I'm not entirely mistaken. And if you do read the Greek, then you can also refer to the original Greek, of course, as well. If you'd like to take a gander at those sections. And also the questions that will be the main questions for each session are already posted on the course website. I can show you what the course looks like on the inside. So this is the curriculum. It looks like
Heads up, Johannes, you're not screen sharing. Oh, there you go. Now you got it. Cool.
Yeah. I had to open it first. So, for example, here is the first lecture. And here he is in the woods.
Yes, when I was still in Dahlonega, Georgia, I recorded them outside.
Excellent. So you can listen to the lectures here. There's the audio file, of course, as well. You can see we're reading Aristotle's Physics, Book 2, Part 7 to 9, and Plato's Republic, Book 4, with the Stephanus pagination, I think it is. Mm-hmm. And then we've got 2 questions here. How is health an analogical concept? That will be a question that will guide you and haunt you throughout the course here in a good way, you know. And no, it's very important because we think of everything so compartmentalized, and instead, you know, at least what I'm really happy about is I haven't heard anyone say in a very long time, which is vats, no brains in a vat. We could just have, well, kind of, because the transhumanists, they don't say it like that anymore. They we'll upload yourself, your true self to the cloud, which is similar. But your true self is not independent of this lump that you call your body. So that's perhaps unfortunate. Who knows? Or maybe not. But you are who you are because of that finite thrown body. That you are your body, in a sense. You are your bodying forth. So also how let's just use those terms, soul, body, and mind or spirit belong together will be an important question as well. Because I think it is a misguided pseudo-Christianity to assume that it's just, you know, you can just split your soul, let's say, from your body and become real on the internet. I mean, on the cloud, in the cloud, once you've been uploaded. So many things to ponder and consider, and ways to change your life. One of the ideas is also that you develop new habits throughout the course as well, and start perhaps taking notes of what you do. As Thomas pointed out, your current body is a memory of what you've been doing and thinking so far. Okay, so that's it for me. Thank you all very much. I hope that you can join us next week. The link to enroll is in the description of this video. So we see you all next week. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, then that's it. Thank you.